How do some of the most notorious people spend their final day when things don't go according to plan? These are the most unexpected final 24 hours of some of the most notorious individuals. Clayton Lockett was born in 1975. In June 1999, he was sentenced to capital punishment for leading a home invasion that resulted in the loss of a 19-year-old girl. After she refused to give up personal information and said she would contact authorities, he took her to a remote location where the situation turned fatal. On the morning his sentence was set to take place, Clayton Lockett made a final, desperate attempt to take control. He injured himself and swallowed pills, forcing staff to intervene. When they approached to help, he resisted and had to be subdued with a stun device. After an evaluation by medical personnel, it was determined that the procedure could move forward. As preparations began, problems quickly surfaced. Medical staff struggled to find a suitable vein for the IV line, trying his arms, legs, neck, and even his feet. Nothing worked. Eventually, a vein near his groin was used, but the needle was shorter than recommended, and the site was covered by a sheet. No one noticed when the line shifted out of place. At 6:23 p.m., the first dose was administered, meant to render him unconscious. By 6:33, he was declared asleep, but just 3 minutes later, something went terribly wrong. Lockett began to groan, writhe, and attempt to speak, clear signs he was still conscious and in distress. Witnesses watched in shock as he struggled against the restraints. Officials quickly closed the blinds. The process was called off, but it was too late. 43 minutes after it began, Lockett was declared deceased, not from the medication, but from a heart attack caused by the failed procedure. But the next man's final hours? They were chaotic, calculated, and unforgettable. Charles Rodman Campbell was born on October 21, 1954, in Oahu, Hawaii. He was sentenced to capital punishment for taking the lives of 3 individuals in what was described as a targeted act of revenge. The victims had previously testified against him in a case involving serious misconduct. A jury later found him guilty, and he was given the ultimate sentence. In the final day before his sentence was carried out on May 27, 1994, Charles Rodman Campbell showed strong resistance and distress. On May 26th, guards found him lying on the floor of his cell. He did not respond when they told him to stand and put on handcuffs. After several more warnings, they used pepper spray to subdue him. When they searched his cell, what they found was deeply unsettling. Before we dive into the details, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. So, what did they find? Several homemade weapons. These included a metal piece sharpened to about 3.5 to 4 inches, a 4-inch lag bolt, a 2-inch nail, a 2-inch screw, and a small spring from a pen. He had hidden these items inside the bunk frame and, according to officials, had stored them in his body cavity, a common way inmates hide contraband. As the time of the procedure drew near, Campbell still resisted. He refused to stand and appeared too weak to walk. Staff had to strap him to a wooden board in order to move him to the place where the sentence would be carried out. Once there, he kept moving his head. This made it hard to place the hood and the noose. It took about 90 seconds for staff to secure both items. At 12:08 a.m. on May 27th, the trapdoor opened. 6 minutes later, at 12:14 a.m., officials confirmed he had passed. An autopsy later showed that his neck and spinal cord were fractured, which led to a quick end. Campbell chose not to make a final statement. He was offered a last meal of fish sticks, scalloped potatoes, a green salad, and a cherry tart. Most of it went untouched. After the procedure, his body was cremated. At first, no one claimed the ashes. Later, his girlfriend and his son took them, following his prior wishes. A few years later in Florida, officials tried to make another transition, from hanging to electricity, and the results were far from smooth. Alan Lee Davis was born in 1944 in Jacksonville, Florida. Christopher Newton was sentenced to capital punishment for taking the lives of Nancy Weiler and her 2 young daughters in 1982 while on parole. On July 8, 1999, on the morning of his sentence, Alan Lee Davis was secured into Florida's electric chair, known as Old Sparky. A leather strap was placed over his mouth and nose, followed by a heavy mask to shield his face. As the procedure began, witnesses noted an unexpected detail. Fluid streamed from his nose, soaking through his shirt and collecting on his chest. Officials later described it as a possible nosebleed, potentially worsened by medication. However, the autopsy did not confirm a clear cause. After the electrical current was stopped, Davis's chest appeared to move repeatedly. Reports estimate around 10 times. Once the procedure was complete, physical evidence revealed burns on his head, leg, and groin area. The disturbing visuals from that day reignited public debate over the electric chair, ultimately helping push Florida toward lethal injection as its primary method of execution in the years that followed. Davis spoke no final words. His last meal was lobster tail, fried potatoes, half-pound of fried shrimp, 6 ounces of fried clams, half a loaf of garlic bread, and a large root beer. He did not finish it. Ricky Ray Rector was born on January 12, 1950 in Conway, Arkansas. He was sentenced to capital punishment for taking the lives of 2 people, including a police officer he had known since childhood. After the second incident, he attempted to take his own life with a shot to the head, resulting in severe brain damage and the loss of much of his frontal lobe. Despite the brain injury, the court found him fit to stand trial. His lawyers argued he was not able to understand what was happening. The court disagreed. He was convicted on 2 counts of taking lives under capital law. He was given the ultimate punishment. On the day before January 24, 1992, when Ricky Ray Rector's sentence was to be carried out, he showed clear signs of confusion. Guards saw him dancing, howling, barking, and snapping his fingers in his cell. He told them he spotted snakes and alligators around him, and he kept saying he was scared the guards would let those animals in. When someone let him know his mother had passed away, he didn't seem upset. He simply asked, "When's dinner?" That morning, he was given a last meal of steak, fried chicken, cherry-flavored drink, and pecan pie. He didn't touch the pie and said he was saving it for later, which made it obvious he didn't grasp that this was the very last meal he'd ever get. Once it was time for the final procedure, medical staff struggled for more than 50 minutes to find a usable vein. His larger build and the antipsychotic medication he'd been taking made it hard. He moaned throughout and even tried to help the nurses find a spot. He never seemed to understand what was really happening. Despite questions about whether he fully understood, the procedure went ahead. Then Governor Bill Clinton cut short his campaign trip to return and approve the final steps. His last words were,
"I'm going to vote for Clinton in the fall."
For his final meal, he requested steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and pecan pie. He left the pie untouched. He said he was saving it for later, showing again that he did not understand what was about to happen. The next individual's family did something no one would forget, just seconds before his final moments. Billy Wayne Coble was born in 1948. He served in the Vietnam War and later worked as an electrician. In 1989, he planned and carried out the taking of 3 family members: his estranged wife's parents, Robert and Zelda Visha, and her brother, Bobby Visha, a police officer. This happened in Axtell, Texas. He was in distress over his pending divorce. He went to their homes and surprised them. They all lost their lives. He then took his wife from her home. During a police chase, he struck her before officers stopped him. In 1990, a court found him guilty of taking those lives and gave him the ultimate punishment. A 2007 appeals court ordered a new trial. In 2008, he was again given the same punishment. His final appeal reached the U.S. Supreme Court. On February 28, 2019, they declined to review his case. After that, the way was cleared to carry out his sentence. On the day it happened, Coble spent his last hours at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. He declined a special last meal. He chose the standard meal of a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke. At about 6:13 p.m., he was led into the chamber. He spoke to the 5 people he had chosen to watch. He said,
"Yes, sir, that will be $5. I love you, I love you, I love you. Mike, I love you. Where's Nellie at? I love you, that will be $5. Take care."
Moments later, things turned chaotic in the witness room. His son, Gordon, pounded on the glass and shouted. His other son, Dalton, joined him. A daughter-in-law also became upset and swung at people. Prison officers moved them outside to a courtyard. They were handcuffed and charged with resisting the officers. Inside the chamber, staff gave Coble a single dose of pentobarbital. He gasped and then began snoring. At 6:24 p.m., 11 minutes after entering, he took his final breath. Coble entered the chamber and within minutes had passed away, even as his family erupted in grief outside. But what happens when an inmate not only accepts his fate, but even jokes while staff spend hours hunting for a vein? Christopher Newton was born in November 1969. On November 15, 2001, a chess game escalated into a fatal encounter. Newton struck Brewer in the face, tied a rope around his neck, and gagged him. When Brewer continued to show signs of life, Newton tightened the rope until he stopped moving. He later confessed in detail and said he drank Brewer's body fluids afterward. He pleaded guilty and waived all appeals, asking for the ultimate sentence. On the morning of May 24, 2007, the state of Ohio prepared to carry out its sentence at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. But what was meant to be a straightforward procedure quickly ran into complications. At 265 pounds, execution staff struggled to locate a viable vein. After at least 10 attempts and nearly 2 hours of delays, the process remained stalled. Despite the situation, Christopher Newton remained calm. He cracked jokes, spoke casually with the staff, and even asked for a bathroom break while waiting. Eventually, both arms were secured and the IVs were in place. At 11:53 a.m., nearly 2 hours past the scheduled time, the sentence was carried out. His final words were strangely lighthearted.
I sure could use a beef stew and a chicken bone.
Earlier, he had requested a full last meal: steak, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, feta cheese, a soft drink, cake, and watermelon. But what if, just as the hour approaches, the courts step in and stop the whole thing? Bruce Earl Ward was born in 1956. Jack Gordon Ward was sentenced to the state's highest penalty for taking the life of an 18-year-old girl in a Little Rock convenience store in 1989. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and struggled with delusions throughout his life and legal proceedings. In 2017, Arkansas scheduled 8 back-to-back procedures over 11 days, racing to use a soon-to-expire supply of chemicals. Jack Gordon Ward was one of those selected. He was moved to the Cummins unit, where the state carries out its highest sentence. For his final meal, Ward chose pecan pie but set it aside, saying he'd eat it afterward, a sign of the delusion that he would survive the process. As the hour approached, his attorneys filed urgent appeals, arguing he couldn't fully understand what was happening. The Arkansas Supreme Court stepped in and paused the plan, citing real concerns about his mental state. The state chose not to fight the ruling. Though everything had been set in motion, the procedure was stopped. Ward never gave final words. He never ate the pie. Instead, he remained in the unit for those awaiting the state's highest penalty until April 2025, when he passed away from natural causes after 35 years in custody. James Edward Smith was born in Kentucky, but no one knows the exact date. He was deeply involved in Voodoo and referred to himself as a Voodoo priest. In 1983, he went into the Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston, Texas, intending to steal money. During this incident, he caused the passing of Larry Don Rojas, the district manager, even though Rojas had handed over the money just like he was told. Right after it happened, Smith was chased by Rojas's co-workers and some people nearby. They managed to catch him and held him down until authorities arrived. While in custody, Smith claimed he was connected to 6 other acts tied to rituals, but there was no actual evidence to back up his words, just his disturbing claims. His mother spoke in court about how deeply he believed in voodoo and dark spiritual practices. She described how it had taken over his thoughts and behavior. Even though the other 6 claims couldn't be proven, the court focused on what had happened to Rojas. Smith was held fully responsible and received the strongest punishment allowed at the time. On his final day, Smith made a request that stood out. For his last meal, he asked for a specific type of dirt called rayakunda. He believed it would help him with reincarnation through a voodoo ritual. Since dirt isn't considered food, the request was denied. Instead, he was given yogurt. He stayed calm during the day, spending most of his time either watching TV or sleeping. He wore a plain white uniform and didn't ask for anything extra. When it was time to speak, he continued to say he wasn't the one responsible. He said, "I am not the one responsible. I did not take anyone's life." He also used the moment to talk about the justice system, saying people needed to open their eyes to the reality of these situations. As he ended his words, he smiled, gave a wink, and said, "Hare Krishna," which is a well-known spiritual chant from Hinduism. The process began at 12:19 a.m., and by 12:31 a.m. it was over. James searched for meaning. The next individual rejected it, loudly. Aileen Warnos was born in 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Her early years were full of hardship. Her mother left her behind, and her strict grandfather took over. He treated her harshly. By age 11, she was engaging in personal exchanges just to get food and medicine. Between 1989 and 1990, while living in Florida, she was responsible for the passing of 7 men. She said she acted to protect herself from unwanted behavior. Her method was to lure them in and then inflict fatal harm at close range. She was arrested on January 9, 1991. 1 year later, in January 1992, a jury found her guilty in the case involving Richard Mallory's passing. During later proceedings, she admitted to the other incidents and spoke about wanting spiritual peace. The court gave her the ultimate sentence. She was sent to Broward Correctional Institution in Florida. As her final days approached, her behavior grew more unusual. She insisted that prison staff were tampering with her meals, adding dirt and other substances to make her sick. She believed they were trying to push her into a breakdown. She spoke of sonic pressure, saying it felt like her head was being crushed. She described harsh body searches, handcuffs that dug into her wrists, noises at all hours, constant window checks, weak water flow, and a damp, mildewed mattress. She felt the guards mocked her and treated her unfairly. A panel of mental health experts reviewed her case and determined she understood her situation and was fit to face her sentence. In her final hours, she withdrew into silence. She barely spoke to staff or other inmates, keeping to herself. Instead of asking for an elaborate last meal, she requested only a simple cup of coffee. When the moment arrived, she offered this puzzling farewell.
"Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back."
Her words left many wondering about her state of mind. On October 9, 2002, the procedure was carried out, and her body was respectfully cremated. At her request, her friend arranged for the song "Carnival" by Natalie Merchant to play during her farewell. As the walls closed in, the next individual made one final gamble, a move that stunned everyone. Ponchai Kamau Wilkerson was born in 1971 in Houston, Texas. On November 28, 1990, he and an accomplice broke into the Royal Gold Jewelry store during a series of thefts. They left twice, but Wilkerson came back. He fired at jeweler Chung Myung Yi from close range. Yi lost his life from the wounds. In July 1991, a jury found Wilkerson responsible and gave him the strongest sentence allowed under Texas law. His conviction was reviewed in 1994, and every later appeal was turned down. Wilkerson's time in maximum security was far from calm. On Thanksgiving Day, the prison was quiet with holiday distractions. He and 6 others tried to escape. They hid in the recreation yard. There, they sawed through the fence with a smuggled hacksaw. Each cut brought them closer to freedom. Then guards spotted movement in the dark. Alarms sounded. Officers rushed in. The escape ended before it began. Wilkerson did not accept being locked up without a fight. In February 1998, he and another person held a 57-year-old guard as a hostage at the Terrell unit. Negotiations stretched on for 13 tense hours. No one knew if the guard would be harmed or set free. Finally, the guard left without injury. It showed that Wilkerson was more than a regular prisoner. He posed a serious challenge to the system. On the day his sentence was to end his life, Wilkerson refused to cooperate. He barricaded himself in his cell. Guards used gas and force to bring him out. They took him to the room where his sentence would be carried out. He refused his final meal and left no instructions. When offered a last chance to speak, he said,
"This is not a capital punishment case."
Then he fell silent. After his sentence was carried out, Wilkerson surprised everyone once more. As his body lay still, he spit out a small key for cuffs and leg restraints. The key measured about 1.5 inches. Prison staff were stunned. They wondered where he got it. They asked how long he had hidden it. Most of all, they asked what he had been planning. Even now, no one knows the answer. The next person stepped into the courtroom and had one last thing to complain about. Thomas Joseph Grasso was born in 1962 in West Babylon, New York. On December 24, 1990, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he fatally harmed 87-year-old Hilda Johnson and took $12 and her television. 6 months later, on July 4, 1991, in Staten Island, he entered the home of 81-year-old Leslie Holtz to steal his Social Security check. Grasso was caught in New York soon after that second event. He admitted to both incidents. He was first given a prison term of 20 years to life. Then he was sent back to Oklahoma. In 1992, he pleaded guilty there and received the harshest sentence available. On his final day behind bars, Grasso stuck to a simple routine. He watched television and spoke with prison staff. He also spent much of his time thinking about his last meal. He made a grand request: 2 dozen steamed mussels, 2 dozen steamed clams, a double cheeseburger from Burger King, half a dozen barbecued spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, half a pumpkin pie with whipped cream and diced strawberries, and a can of Spaghettios with meatballs. When the tray arrived, there was one big mistake. Instead of Spaghettios, he got plain spaghetti. It was a small detail, but it mattered greatly to him. He later said,
"I did not get my Spaghettios. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this."
At 12:22 a.m. on March 20, 1995, the state ended his life at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He made no other final comments beyond his note about the Spaghettios. The next individual had nothing left. No fear, no future. What he did next was pure desperation. Martin Edward Gurule was born in 1969. He lost his mother before he turned 1 year old. His father and grandmother raised him after that. He went to W.B. Ray High School in Corpus Christi. Later, he worked at the Corpus Christi State School, helping care for people with intellectual disabilities. His girlfriend, Melissa Smith, worked at the U&I restaurant in Corpus Christi. On October 12, 1992, Gurule and some friends planned to steal money from that restaurant late at night. During that plan, co-owner Mike Piperis and employee Anthony Staton lost their lives. In July 1993, a court found Gurule responsible for what happened there. He received a sentence that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Smith was sent to prison for 25 years. With life in prison ahead of him, Gurule decided to try escaping. On Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1998, he and 6 other inmates used the more relaxed holiday routine to prepare. They hid in the recreation room and piled cushions and sheets to make it look like their rooms were still occupied. They darkened their uniforms with markers so they wouldn't stand out at night. Then they broke through a door to the yard and forced open a second barrier. They climbed onto the roof of another building and waited for full darkness. Just after midnight, guards spotted them and moved in. 6 inmates gave up right away. Gurule did not. He ran about 100 feet across open ground, climbed over a barbed wire fence, ran another 70 feet to a clearing, and climbed a second fence. Guards fired 18 shots, but he made it over the wall and vanished into the night. Finding someone under these conditions is very hard. More than 500 officers took part in the search. They used dogs, boats, and helicopters. Governor George W. Bush called in the Texas Rangers and offered a $5,000 reward for any helpful tips. 7 days later, fishermen found Gurule in a small branch of the Trinity River near Huntsville. He had a gunshot wound in his back. He could not stay afloat and ended up drowning while trying to hide from the dogs. After this escape, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice made big changes. In March 1999, it moved its highest security section to the Terrell Unit, now called the Allen B. Polunsky Unit, in West Livingston, Polk County. It also ended the work-capable program, which had let some inmates move around under supervision. Pedro Luis Medina was born in Cuba on October 5, 1957. He left Cuba in 1980 during the Mariel boat lift, when about 125,000 people came to the United States. Before that, he had lived in a Cuban psychiatric hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and major depression with psychosis. In 1982, Medina was found responsible for the passing of Dorothy James, a 52-year-old schoolteacher in Orlando, Florida. Investigators learned she had been tied up and hurt several times in her apartment. Later that night, Medina was found asleep in her car at a rest area on Interstate 10 near Lake City. He was taken into custody for using her car without permission. At his trial, he denied causing her passing, but admitted he had been in her apartment and then driven off in her car. Even though he had a history of mental health issues, the court decided he was able to stand trial. He was convicted and received the court-ordered ultimate penalty. On March 25, 1997, after spending 15 years awaiting the outcome, Medina was prepared for his sentence at Florida State Prison in Rayford. In the early morning, staff moved him to a holding cell near the chamber and ran final safety checks. He met with spiritual advisors and his lawyers for last conversations and prayers. As the time neared, guards led him into the chamber and secured him to the chair known as Old Sparky. Witnesses, including reporters, state officials, and members of Dorothy's family, watched from an adjacent room. At about 7 a.m., the current was turned on. Almost immediately, a flame shot up from the headpiece and thick smoke filled the chamber. The smell was strong, and some observers had trouble breathing. The flames burned for a few seconds. Despite this alarming turn, the staff continued. Medina's chest rose and fell a few times, leading some to think he might still respond, but medical staff later confirmed he did not survive. An autopsy showed a severe burn on the top of his head, matching the headpiece malfunction. Investigators found that a dry sponge had been placed in the wrong spot between a wet sponge and the metal screen. This mistake caused extra resistance and led to the ignition. The incident raised serious questions about the reliability of electric chairs, and some states chose to switch to other methods. Medina's last day followed the usual procedures, but ended with a disturbing incident that reopened the debate over using such penalties in the United States.